Okay, here's another one. Roulette or counting cards? You didn't think you'd have to participate, but, you know, keep you on your toes here. Go for it.
Well, roulette is a game where you most a chance when you count cards. It's actually a methodological point you do it.
Absolutely. So you're looking at complete random chance, or you're looking at something that you have control over and you control the outcome. So random training versus periodized plans. And if you think of Watson saying, oh, you know, don't do periodized planning, what he described was periodized plan, and he knows it. He has his students on a periodized plan simply because of the school year and because of all the other things that he described, like hormones. So what I'm going to go into on this one is that without planned training, you're almost always going to get results initially, especially with a relatively untrained athlete. So that relatively untrained athlete is going to get results simply because you've given them an overload or whatever it is, so they're going to adapt. But that's not going to last very long. Once they've had that adaptation, unless you continue to apply more of a stimulus, you're not going to see much more. So, and then the other factor is when you're dealing with high performance athletes, if I'm working with a 16-year-old volleyball player or soccer player or whoever they are, they chances are haven't had a lot of weight training, haven't had a lot of extra physical conditioning for their sport. So I start implementing a weight program or whatever it is, and I look like a god because they're getting all these strength benefits and yada yada. Well, really, it doesn't take a lot of hard work. Almost any personal trainer can do this and get results from this particular athlete because they're relatively untrained. Well, you take a 35-year-old professional athlete who's been doing this all of their life and have peaked multiple times and train all year long. If you'd ask Paul Durden how much time off from physical training he's had in the last 15 years, his answer would be no more than 2 weeks. No more than 2 weeks in 15 years, not physical training. And guess why? Surgery. Okay? Some knee surgeries, things like that. So that type of training, when you're training that long and you want to still glean results out of this athlete, takes a fair bit of planning in terms of their recovery, especially if you're looking at someone who's traveling a lot over multiple time zones and having to perform regularly, especially someone who's training or playing, say, 3 matches in a given week, week after week after week, and then the off season is no off season because they're playing national team as well. So I trained both the men's and women's national volleyball teams for 8 years, so that's 2 quads, and these are almost all these athletes are playing pro and playing national season. So to keep getting results out of these athletes is really tough to do. So optimal results and recovery require specific planning. So your solution is a solid annual plan that encompasses well-orchestrated phases of building and recovery with room for adjustment. Why room for adjustment? Well, that competition got canceled or the schedule changed, they moved their dates of competition, or somebody has an injury or what have you. So it needs to be able to be flexible. This is a super basic, simple template that I use sometimes for planning just for strength and conditioning. If I was using it in conjunction with the coach, it would look ridiculous. There's nothing filled in on here, totally blank, totally empty, just a template. But if I was using this in conjunction with a coach and their training plan, say a triathlon coach, a swimming coach, a volleyball coach, it's ridiculously complicated because of all of the other practices and schedules that are in there. So I'm going to quickly go through general adaptation syndrome, which probably most of you have heard of. So you've got an overload, you've got a stress, and we've got distress and eustress. Both of those stresses, whether it's good stress or bad stress, elicit the same type of response in our body. A hormonal change, the need for recovery. So you get that heavy load, and all of a sudden the performance, how many things are here? The performance decreases, so you're not performing as well because of that overload, right? And you stress some more. So what you've done here is you've decreased your performance some more because you've added more stress, more overload, whether it's increased intensity in the training, whether you've increased weight in the weight room, whatever it happens to be, we're just generalizing here. So what we want is a super compensation. We want to achieve training results. So this happens by planning out your frequency, your intensity, your time, and your type of training. Oops, I missed one key thing. Anyway, the one thing that I wanted to point out on there was that what was happening in that whole scenario was that your stress was there. There wasn't enough recovery time in between, so insufficient time between sessions, but there were really good recovery strategies. So the nutrition was good, the sleep was good, the activities in between your training was good. All of those recovery strategies were very good, although the load was still increasing. But in this scenario, what we're looking at is poor recovery strategies. So same scenario, we've got increased stress, increased load, the decrease in performance, but instead of seeing that super compensation effect with poor recovery strategies, you're looking at decrease in performance. So there, what you're into is potentially an overreached stage, or maybe even to an overtraining stage. And what I want to point out here is that what we want is this functional overtraining. What that means is that we decrease the performance because of the stress, but we've done it in a way that we can get the recovery, and the decrement is only temporary, and then we get that super compensation effect. If it's non-functional overreaching and you've decreased the performance more over time with whatever you've been doing, then you're looking at, but it's not to your plan. So then what happens is that you're looking at possibly weeks or months in terms of your recovery and trying to get that back. And if you're actually in overtraining syndrome, which I think is possibly used a little too much, the terminology for it's used too much, but if this is really diagnosed through blood tests and multiple parameters, then you're looking at literally months of getting back to what a healthy state is, where they can actually keep increasing in performance. And I've trained hundreds of athletes, maybe even thousands, in multiple sports, and I've seen one that's probably a true overtraining syndrome, and that's in a triathlete. But one of the reasons that they got there is they had an intestinal disorder, so when they were trying to do all their really good recovery practices, they weren't absorbing the nutrients. So even though they had the right practices in place, it wasn't working.